Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is Oxhorn, and today I've got a special video all about how vassal settlements work. This is a two-part series on vassal settlements. Today we're going to be lifting up the hood of the game to look at the code beneath it to figure out how vassal settlements work, and tomorrow I'm going to show you which Commonwealth settlements make the best vassal settlements to support a large network of raider outposts. So stay tuned tomorrow for that. For the TLDR crowd who really don't want to go through the code, be sure to check the description of this video. I have a hot link to the very end of the video where I go over all of the major points that we divine in the code. For those who don't know, the entire reason vassal settlements exist is because raiders hate manual labor. They just don't like to work. So, if you assign them to farm, you actually get a significant penalty. If I recall, the penalty is 3 times the amount of food generated at that settlement by raiders who are assigned to farming. So if your raiders are generating 10 food, that's a 30 happiness penalty. So to get around this, what you have to do is you have to sack nearby settlements, basically enslave them, turn them into vassals, and then they send you tributes of food, water, caps, and scrap on a daily basis. But this raises a lot of questions. How can you increase the amount of food, water, caps, and scrap that they send to your raider outposts? Does it matter how close a vassal settlement is to your raider outposts? Why don't some settlements show up as available options to become vassals? I'm going to answer all those questions and more right now. Let's check out the code. So taking a look at the code, we learn a lot about how vassal settlements work. The first thing we realize is that the larger your vassal settlements are in terms of population, the more money you're going to be getting at each of your raider outposts. We see here that there's a vassal income population multiplier, and this means that this number is multiplied by your vassal population every day to generate the number of caps. So if the population of one of your vassal settlements is 10, every single day it's going to generate 30 caps. We also see that there's a multiplier for the food and water that it can produce. So the way this code works is a 1 equals 100% and a 0.5 equals 50%. Every single day, 50% of the food and water that a vassal settlement produces gets sent to your DLC 04 Nuka World Workshop reference. This appears to be a central pool from which all of your raider outposts benefit. So let's say that you've got a vassal settlement with 10 people and only 2 of them are producing food. That means that they're producing 12 food because each settler can produce 6 on his or her own. 50% of 12 is 6. Then that means that settlement would only be giving you 6 food. But let's say that you were thinking ahead. You could build up a settlement to have a whole lot of settlers, let's say 30 or more, make all of them farmers so that every single person is producing a whole lot of food. Then sack it, turn it into a vassal settlement, and you're going to get 30 times 3 in terms of caps. So that's 90 caps each day generated by that settlement. And then 50% of the food that settlement is producing. So since each settler can produce 6 food, if you have 30 settlers farming for food, that's 270 food being produced by one settlement, divided by half is 135. So one settlement, one vassal settlement with 30 settlers farming would produce 135 food for your Nuka World Workshop reference ID. But let's say that you don't want to put the time and energy into building up settlements before turning them into vassals. We see that there's a minimum food income right here, which is 4. So every vassal settlement will produce at least 4 food each day, which is really not enough. If your raider outposts grow at all, they're going to be consuming more than that. We also learned a little bit about storage caps. So this is referring to the Fizztop Mountain chest, the Vassal Caps chest. When it reaches a stored number of 20,000 caps, it no longer accepts anymore. That's a huge number. But if you have a whole lot of vassals that are subjugated by your raiders, you're going to reach this 20,000 mark pretty quickly. So it's still in your best interests to loot the chest in Fizztop Mountain as often as you can. There are also caps on stored scrap. So this line right here tells us that each vassal settlement can produce at most 5 scrap per day. Stop producing scrap when this amount is stored, 100. So that's another good reason to go back to remove the scrap and caps and food that are in them so that they continue to produce for you. Here we see some of the code in action. This one talks about the max stored vassal income. If the current caps stored in your Fizztop Mountain chest are fewer than the max stored vassal income, then add caps to the chest at Nuka World. If not, or else, don't add any more. This bit of code tells us a little bit about how and why you can attack a vassal settlement. First, the code rolls through the permanent actors that happen to be at this location. We're talking about essential characters, characters that give quests, companions, so on and so forth. If any of them are at this location and they are alive, do not clear this spot. This means that if you have any companions at a Minuteman settlement that you want to turn into a vassal, you need to move them. If you haven't completed any quests at a particular settlement, for example, Abernathy Farm or Abraham Finch at the Finch Farm, you should probably do those quests first, or kill those quest givers, if you can, before you can turn that into a vassal. Once done, it says clear it, just clear it. You can now subjugate that particular vassal settlement. But I should note that you can't actually turn a settlement into a vassal settlement if there are no settlers there. After all, it can't produce food and caps for you if there are no subjugated settlers there to farm. Here's the code that talks about food production. This function will choose the greater of these two values, either the minimum vassal food income, which as we learned earlier is 4, or the food production, which is 50% of what a vassal settlement will produce. The note for the code says, in this way, vassals will always provide at least some food, either the minimum value, which is 4, or the food production, which is 50% of what they normally produce. The same is true for water. The water production is the exact same code for the food production. Now there is a storage cap for the amount of food and water that can be stored in this invisible DLC 04 Nuka World Workshop reference. As we talked about earlier, the water and food produced by vassals gets stored in this Nuka World Workshop reference, which is then distributed evenly amongst all of your different workshops. That's at least what I am seeing from this code. If the current stored food is greater than the max stored food per population times the total raider population, then they turn off the production of food. No more food is going to be placed into your Nuka World Workshop reference. And the same is true for water right here. Here's the bit that turns off scavenging production if the cap is already met. It's normally set to true, but if the stored scavenge is greater than the max stored scavenge base plus scavenge per population times total raider population, then the allowed scavenge production is false. So it looks like the max stored scrap bases are modified by raider population. In short, if you have more raiders, your workshops are going to be able to hold more scrap generated by vassals. And here's the bit that governs caps. If the current caps stored in your Fizztop Mountain box are fewer than the max stored vassal income, then generate caps and send caps to Nuka World. Otherwise, or else, if those caps are greater than or equal to, then don't add any more. Now, the kinds of crops that are generated are random based on the crops that are planted at that workshop. We see here that the food to produce is chosen randomly based on the kinds of crops that happen to be planted at that settlement. So the individual units of food are capped, but the types of food that you get is random. And here we see that again. Now for each food to produce, pick randomly from each valid type. Or else, if it can't find food, it'll produce a random type of food to meet that 4 food minimum. It produces a generic food. So as we saw in the code earlier, every vassal settlement will at least produce 4 food for you, even if there are no crops planted there and no settlers assigned to farming. This bit right here, I believe, governs that. But if they're larger vassals, it will choose the food that that settlement is actually producing. Now, I have scanned this code for hours trying to find any reference to the range of a vassal settlement in relation to your raider workshops. I've looked in the workshop parent script. I've gone through all of the scripts. Here are all of the scripts associated with the Nuka World DLC, DLC 04, and I've gone through half of these, any of them that look like they're at all related to settlements or workshops or vassals, and I couldn't find anything that said something like vassal settlements need to be within 4 squares of a raider outpost in order for it to work. There just isn't anything in this code that looks like it puts a range on vassal settlements. But we do see that there's that pooled inventory DLC 04 Nuka World Workshop that we saw that these vassal settlements are depositing daily production of food, water, and caps into, which is then evenly distributed amongst all of the raider outposts. Because of that, I don't think that there is a range on vassal settlements. I think that even if you had a vassal settlement in the far south of the map, and your only raider outpost is at the very top of the map, it'll still produce food, and it'll still support the vassal settlement at the top of the map. I don't see anything in this code that says otherwise. There's also no indicator in the game that tells us which vassal settlements are in range of which outposts. There's only one indicator that has anything to do with range, but it only has to do with Nuka radio. So for example, look at this scenario. I've got one vassal settlement here. This is Abernathy Farm. I have one raider outpost here. This is the Red Rocket truck stop. And I have one unclaimed settlement here. This is Sanctuary. This is neither a vassal nor a raider outpost. This is still currently a Minuteman settlement. I could turn this into a vassal or a raider outpost if I want. Now when I hover over the raider outpost, you see how the icon for Sanctuary changes? It changes to what looks like the vassal icon, only the chain goes only halfway around in a circle. What this is telling us is it's telling us that the radio propaganda, the Nuka World radio propaganda amplifier that I have at Red Rocket Truck Stop, is reaching Sanctuary, which is making it easier to intimidate and attack this settlement or to convince them to become a vassal. That's all. It doesn't have anything to do with the range of this settlement in terms of being able to supply the raider outpost with supplies. They're completely different things. It's simply showing us how far the amplifier at Red Rocket Truck Stop can reach. And according to this, it can reach Sanctuary. But you can scroll all over the place, and here are my vassal settlements, and you hover over them and it doesn't show you which raider outpost it reaches or anything. There's no in-game mechanic that's showing you this at all. And based on what I've seen in the code, there's no bit of code that says that a vassal settlement only works if it's so close or so far from a raider outpost. Now, yes, I do realize that Shank in Nuka World says that a vassal settlement needs to be close to a raider outpost. But I think he's lying. I don't think that's actually built into the game. And this isn't unprecedented for Bethesda to do. The common rule of thumb for defense in a Minuteman settlement has always been add your food to your water, and that's how much defense you should have. I don't recall if there's anyone in the game that actually says that or not, but that's what people have been believing for a very long time. But as many of you have discovered by watching my videos here, the code actually says that to get the full happiness benefit from your defense, all you need is 1 defense for every person in your population. That's it. It has nothing to do with your food plus water, it's based on your population. That's what the code actually says. And yet everybody's been talking about adding your food to your water. In terms of settlement happiness, it doesn't matter. And I think it's a similar situation here. Even though Hank says that you need to have a vassal next to your raider outposts, I don't think you really do. See, here's another example of it. This is Hangman's Alley. It's cleared, and you hover over Oberland Station, and the icon changes. It simply means that this settlement is within range of this settlement in terms of being intimidated by the amplifier, not that this is some vassal settlement, this doesn't have anyone there by the way, that is in range of this one for giving it resources. They're two different things, managed and governed by two completely different scripts. Well, that was a whole lot of text and code. I hope you're not blind. I hope you stuck with me. But we learned a lot by lifting up the hood. Let me summarize everything we learned really quickly. Number 1, every vassal settlement will produce a minimum of 4 food. Even if none of the settlers at that settlement are assigned to farming, it'll still generate 4 food. Number 2, vassal settlements give raider outposts 50% of the food and water they produce each day. That is a huge amount, which means the larger the settlement, the more resources your raider outposts will enjoy. Number 3, vassal settlements give raider outposts 3 caps times their own population. Another reason to have large settlements. So for example, if you sack a vassal settlement that has 30 settlers, they will send your raider outpost 90 caps per day. Number 4, the chest at Fizztop Mountain is capped at 20,000 caps. So make sure you loot the caps that are placed there as often as you can. Number 5, each vassal settlement can produce up to 5 scrap per day. I didn't see this anywhere in the Nuka World code, but in regular settlements, unassigned settlers will produce 1 scrap a day, and settlers assigned to scavenging stations will produce 2 scrap a day. Which means that to get to your 5 scrap per day cap, you need 5 unassigned settlers or 2 assigned to scavenging stations and 1 unassigned settler. Number 6, your raider outpost workbench is capped at being able to hold 100 scrap. So if you want to depend upon your vassals to produce much of the scrap you use, you'll need to empty out your raider outpost workbenches on a regular basis to make sure that they continue to produce. And number 7, you can't turn a settlement into a vassal until it is free of permanent actors. Permanent actors include companions and any NPCs set to essential, like those who have yet to give you quests. If there's a particular settlement you want to free up so that you can turn it into a vassal, like Finch Farm or the Warwick Homestead, be sure to finish the quests there first before trying. And lastly, number 8, you can't turn a settlement into a vassal that has no settlers living there. This means that you actually need to build the settlement up for the Minutemen before you can sack it and turn it into a vassal. And double lastly, number 9, it doesn't matter how far the vassal settlement is away from your raider outpost. Despite what Shank says, there's nothing in the code that keeps vassals on the opposite end of the map from being able to support your raider outposts on the completely other side of the map. Well, I learned a lot of cool stuff by sifting through this code. The most important thing I think I learned is that to really benefit from the new raider outpost system that came with Nuka World, you gotta build up your settlements for the Minutemen first. Otherwise, each vassal is going to be producing so little food that you're gonna have to make your raiders farm. Once a settlement is turned into a vassal, you no longer have access to the workbench, which means that you can't get new settlers, and you can't reassign settlers, and you can't build things. So it's important to use your time as the general of the Minutemen wisely by building up your settlements to have large populations, producing a lot of food, and at least 5 scrap a day before you turn it into a vassal. Well, as I said at the beginning of this video, this is only part 1 of a part 2 series. In tomorrow's video, I'm going to show you on the map which Commonwealth settlements are going to make the best vassals. It's somewhat subjective since it really doesn't matter, so be sure to tune in for that. If you like this video, please subscribe for more Fallout 4 and Nuka World content. And if you like what I do and you want to support me on a more personal level, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers get access to my private Discord server and get a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad that you're watching my videos. Your views keep this channel alive. Leave a comment in the video if you have a question. I read all of my comments and I respond to the best ones. And thank you all so very much for watching.